So I invite anyone to ask questions. That's what this session is about. You can ask questions in person too. So she's here for the weekend asking questions in person. We thought we'll also go live along with it. Yeah. Uh, to give you some background, she's already um, observing her breath and very intent in this particular direction. So her questions might be advanced for some of you. Yeah, go on.
I don't know if it is advanced. Let's probably give a few seconds to see if
No,
we're getting any questions.
we'll.
Yeah, sure. We have probably this journey for me started couple of years ago. I am not sure, I'm not exactly able to pinpoint at a particular date and say this is where it started, but I think it majorly started when I started asking questions, right, about myself. And that when the journey began, um, I came across multiple paths. Although now I don't like to use the word path, because right now I'm in an understanding that it's not so much as a path, right? It is what suits an individual person the best. It could be combination of techniques. It could be combination of different things from different areas, and we have classified it into different areas: Vedas, Tantras, many things. Right-handed path, left-handed path. This is yoga. This is tantra. At my journey started when I observed my breath. When I started observing my breath, and I didn't even know until a couple of days back that that's where the internalization started. And after that I've been in Kriya Yoga, and then there is introduction of parts of Tantra and so many things, and back to observing the breath. And so now I kind of ask that question: when someone wants to start this journey, the most basic thing that feels like most basic thing is also the most challenging thing, that it's like you complete this full cycle and come back to the same point multiple times in this journey, and you feel like you didn't go anywhere, you're just revolving around the same point. But that is not true in many sense, but still. So of all the things that is there, what is the most basic thing, and also the um, most how would I say, accurate thing to be doing, which needs no support from external and from anybody, but also it is kind of, it takes you in itself to a path that you should be in, to the right path. What is that most basic thing?
So, what any seeker can have is like a plumb line. The plumb line is a reference line. Anything that deviates from the reference line is not taking you in the right direction. So, what is the plumb line when we come to uh, spiritual inquiry, our spiritual journeys? The plumb line is that if your mind is engaging lesser, if the thoughts you are having is decreasing, if the number of concepts that you have to actively have in mind to do something decreases, if you do not have to think to do something, if you do not have to visualize something, if you do not have to utter something, if you do not have to not do anything also, you are in the right direction. When the when all the guidance that you have received is pushing you towards emptiness in the mind, space, thoughtlessness, what you hear will not be coming from your mind. Let me explain this particular part. What we hear coming from our mind. Humans use language, and language can be used for communication, not with not with each other alone, but with ourselves. When I speak um, in any language, for example, if I'm talking, who am I talking to the most? Forget about language, just think about talking. Who will we talk to the most? We talk 99% of the time to ourselves. I'm talking about the general public. So, there are iterations of words going on in your mind. Some conversation happened. That conversation must have happened long ago or yesterday or would happen at sometime in the future. You go over those exact words that somebody spoke, the words that you spoke, and who is saying all these words internally? Thinking or reasoning is putting these words in different combinations and different orders, in different systems of thought, in different sequences, to see what sequence of words clicks. Thinking or reasoning is basically just us talking to ourselves. If the mind is getting silenced, then it will stop talking to us. You will realize that you are the observer there. When you talk to yourself, the listener is actually you. The speaker is your mind. When the speaker goes silent internally, your senses get sharper. because you are just the observer now. And there is nobody inside you making so much noise already. You can hear better, you can see better, your senses get better. All this happens when you become the observer and you realize that you are the observer and you behave like you are the observer. Human beings have to just be, not act. We are more, uh, today's people can be described more appropriately as human talkings rather than human beings. Like the hen that just, like the birds that make their noises. At least they involve, at least animals, in do not think of sounds that they made yesterday and sounds that they make tomorrow. This part is understood to modern science. But humans, if human could make the sounds of a hen only or a bird only, it would he would start thinking of how he sounded yesterday, how he sounded day before yesterday. Did somebody he envisioned as a partner take it rightly or not? You start planning for how he should be making those sounds tomorrow. At least a hen doesn't have all that. A chicken doesn't have all that complexity. A bird doesn't have. Humans have this potential to think about the future and the past. That potential is the true sword. That potential is the true double-edged sword. With that potential, you can achieve things that are not possible to other animals, and with that same potential, you will also block yourself from experiencing bliss, from being aware, from being present in that moment. That's the plumb line. You, your mind engaging lesser and lesser means you going in the right direction. You are closer to the plumb. Certain things like this should be uh, given, should, I don't know, anybody should have received this as fundamental guidance. Only then they will be able to judge uh, any additional guidance they receive. Is it constructive or not? Whatever they learn, whatever they try, all that depends on this plumb line.
few years ago, um, like I said, when I started observing my breath, I it was the first time I came to see the difference in being an observer and an actor, or in other words, that was the first time I came to know that there are two players. There's an observer and there is an actor. When I shifted my focus on my breath. And so I kind of keep coming back to this observing the breath, because it is the most simplest thing to do. Most simplest. And also it is the most close to being the observer. If we are calling the observers or observing state as the godly state, it is also the most close to being in that state. And it will also tell you that all you have to, if you are struggling with something, if you have to fight anything, that is your ego and your mind. And oftentimes mind is playing its own movie and we are not even aware of it. It is going like a train. One thought is getting connected to another thought is getting connected to another, and this is like a train of thoughts. And the and at times it could be not just with this simple observing breath, right? Even when you are sitting for meditation, over the time you actually get that balance. When you're consistent with the practice, and when you're consistent with eliminating those unwanted thoughts and being in that awareness constantly, then you slowly the mind starts shutting down. And it is a very I don't know, very tricky thing, especially. And what is the best way that I can do to silence the mind? And at times it gets so irritating that you're trying to silence the mind, you're going, it's starting to um, get more intense thoughts. You can literally feel there is another person here. It is you, your mind, you're playing some sort of martial art war. You're trying to silence it and it will bring you more intense thoughts, something from the past, or it will, you silence the mind and it is suddenly it will bring some intense worry about the future. So what is the best way that we can do to trick the mind?
Mind is like a child that misbehaves more when you pay attention to it. Mind, consider your mind, anybody's mind, as a very naughty child. And the moment it realizes, it knows that you are paying attention to it, it starts misbehaving even more. That's the nature of such a mind. So what you have to do is ignore the child. So ignore your mind. If you as an observer have to ignore the mind, what can you do? What you can do is, your breath is taking a journey though you are sitting in the same place. Your breath is on a journey. Your mind is a stubborn child to whom you are paying attention to. And that mind is having all its thoughts. So, you as an observer, stop observing the mind, stop paying attention to what it says, and live with your breath. So, you travel with your breath into your own body. So, the observation goes along with your breath into your body, stays there for a while. Then, when you breathe out, the observer observes the breath that is moving out. Still, he did not pay attention. The observer did not pay attention to what the mind was saying. And when the breath has moved out, let the observer observe outside the body, search for the lost breath, and come back into the body only with the breath. And in this entire process, let the observer neglect the mind completely. When the mind does not receive attention, when the mind does not receive attention from you, the observer, it stops. That's the best way.
What is the connection between the mind and the ego sense? Are those two the same, or is it two different entities?
Ego sense is a state of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Ego sense comes from some kind of reasoning, some kind of accomplishments, some kind of acts, or some kind of physique. In perfect present tense, you cannot have ego. You can't have anything in perfect present tense. That ego is a function of your past or what you think of yourself in the future. Ego is a function of your past. For example, if there was a king who had won many battles and he also boasted of himself as being somebody who could never be defeated, he identifies himself, he thinks of himself as, say, the greatest warrior. Or this is applicable to anybody at any level. I'm just giving you an example. So if he is identifying himself as a warrior, then that is a kind of ego that he has developed. Why did he develop that? He could have valid reasoning that he was never defeated. But still, assigning himself this particular character, this particular personality, this particular state, all that happened because he let his mind do that. The mind did all the reasoning. the mind gave that conclusion. The conclusion is the ego. Those acts of winning were not the ego. Based on those acts of winning, I am this is a statement that was spoken to him internally by his mind. As an observer, he heard his mind say that and internalized it. Then the state he reaches is that egoistic state. Him internalizing what the mind gives him as his characteristic or his character or his capability or his personality or what he means, his identity. The mind gave him, through reasoning, gave that option of that particular identity as the greatest warrior. And this observer internalized it and considered that as truth. Though the observer is just an observer, from the reality of being just an observer, the observer went astray and thought of himself as the warrior because the mind said so. That is when ego plays all its mischief. This is how ego operates. This is applicable even to a programmer. It's applicable to a startup founder. It's applicable to a beggar. It's applicable to anybody. It's applicable to a laborer.
It is also applicable to a spiritual seeker.
Of course, and even in more hideous ways. Because there he could assign himself the identity of a seeker, and that itself means he has stopped seeking. When I call myself a spiritual seeker, I stop being a spiritual seeker. In its true sense, because a true seeker will lose all his identity and just become an observer and won't even call himself an observer, because calling himself an observer is giving himself an identity of being an observer.
And we oftentimes, when we are doing our practice, I don't know, I used to not hear, I've never heard this word in any of the scriptures, but it is something that recently came up all of a sudden, which is say sadhana. Like I'm doing some sadhana, and that is completely going in the opposite direction of what I'm trying to do. The moment I sit thinking that I'm doing some sort of sadhana, the intent of sadhana is lost. I mean, there is no reason for me to call it a word, put that word into my mind, and it's like I'm giving an invitation for the mind um, to create this state called the ego sense. And it's very easy, even without knowing it, you take that identity and you say you're a spiritual seeker doing sadhana. So when you said ego sense, right, so now we have the observer, the mind, the ego sense. The reason why I'm trying to understand more about the nature of ego sense is when we become an observer, we we become like a mirror. We start reflecting. We can very clearly see what the mind is trying to do. So you can very clearly identify the emotions. There is anger. There is um, selfishness. There are so many emotions that you experience firsthand as an observer, and it is very annoying. Oh, am I actually being selfish? It's a and you're since you're in an observer state, you will accept that easily. That the mind is in the state like otherwise, if you come and tell me that you're being selfish, I'll reject that right away. But when I observe it myself, I can very clearly see that, experiencing that first, and the emotion getting triggered, playing out. Could be anything. It could be attachment. It could be um, any kind of emotion, be it. But there, it feels like there is nothing to do about it. That's the way the mind is. But the point I internalize, like you said, the point I internalize and go with that, when I just jump on that train of thoughts, jump on that train of whatever movie it is creating, and I go and I say I am this hero. When this, that's when it gets completely destroyed.
Not completely destroyed. That's when you become.
The
When you
identity.
stop. When that's when you stop becoming. Stop being the observer.
Right.
Stop progressing towards
Right.
self-realization. At for whatever amount of time, you jump over the train of
Yeah.
thoughts that your mind is generating.
This observer, is it Atman? Is it is that what we call as Atma?
See, there are so many words, but what I can tell you for sure is that that observer is your awareness. That is who you are. So, if that is who you are, try to be yourself. Be the observer. That's all the guidance you need. You do not need concepts or conceptualization about Atman, Paramatman, God, or anything on earth. You don't need all that. When you see all this for yourselves, there is a stage where you will see more and more clearly that you are actually just that awareness, just you will go closer and closer to self realization. And once you have that self realization, all these words, even language, calling it Atma or Paramatma or whatever language, whatever scripture, is of no use to you. You don't need anything. You are in that state of bliss. So, any seeker should decrease this on the number of concepts, the number of thoughts, the number of words, that occupy your mind, and to give you an objective answer, no, the observer is not that, but the observer is you. You are the awareness. Because you can do something by keeping the Atman aside at a point where you experience death and rebirth while you are alive. There you will understand the difference between Atman and you. But it comes with realization. Because if nobody talks about it's pointless in talking about it, because unless you experience it, you will not understand it. And once you experience it, nobody will understand you when you explain it. Why that happens is the human mind in its normal state does not have the capability to comprehend such thought. It's beyond the capacity of the mind. So, when somebody who has had that experience, even if they try to clearly explain it to you, you will call them mad. Society will call them mad because all of them have similar minds and none of them can decode what he's telling. So, something that's not understood to the common public is something out of this world, unreasonable, and anybody who speaks unreasonable things, out of worldly things, is a madman. That's how the society treats that person.
If you are saying we have to reduce the number of concepts, words, ideologies, words, then what is true knowledge that we should be going after as someone who is very serious about self realization? What we have we have classified, we have put everything that is out there um, under the umbrella knowledge, even the modern education. So for someone who is very seriously pursuing or in the path of self realization, what is that knowledge that will truly help them without giving an invitation to the mind to disrupt this this um, silence or the blankness? And does it have to come directly from a teacher, or is it something that I can decide on my own by reading books?
See, um, the way you put that question sounds like it should there should be a complicated answer to it, or there should be a framework. In reality, just observe your breath. That's all. It doesn't get simpler than that. It doesn't get more complicated than that. The problem is people can't digest the fact that it is so simple. The more complex something is, the more engaged the mind can be. The simpler it is, the less engaged the mind has to be. The less engaged the mind has to be, the more enlightened you are. The more enlightened you are, the less engaged the mind is, the less satisfied the mind is. So the mind needs a story. And as long as people cook any kind of story around this simple act, the mind will enjoy it. The mind will enjoy all kinds of stories and tell that that person is the most authentic person because his story is what appealed the most to your mind and to your ego. But where you end up is in a deep, deep hole. And to pull you out from there, it takes a very compassionate teacher and his time, trying to help you understand the nuances of how you have considered your spiritual journey to involve so many things that it actually doesn't have. The, even if there is one additional line of guidance unrelated to what I just said, like observing the breath, that's unnecessary. Every additional story that you hear, every additional behavior that people talk about, like be it waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, sitting erect, sleeping in this particular position, eating that, eating this, doing that, saying this prayer, attending that ritual, all these, I would say, is like a fantasy park for the mind, and the mind enjoys being in that fantasy park. Unlimited entertainment for the mind. And as long as the mind is entertained, you will not even take one step in the direction of self-realization. It's a very dangerous game, and people keep playing that game. The more you know about it, the more restless you can be. The more you know about our cultural practices, people think they'll start living in the right way, but they'll end up being more restless. Maybe all of them were right. That shouldn't matter to you. What should matter is your breath, nothing else. Maybe not stepping out without washing your face or taking a bath. Yeah, that's good. But as long as you don't consider them to be your such guidances to be the main way to live your life, you should not give them the absolute importance in your life. What you give absolute importance to is you becoming the observer and observing your breath. That's it. You can do it while you're doing anything. You're sleeping, you're in the bathroom, or you are in the wash, you are walking, you are dancing, no matter what, or you are sitting, you are meditating, wherever you are. If you can dedicate most of your space and time, most of the space in your mind and your time to observing your breath, you can let go of all such guidances. Anything else can be given up. And giving it all up is how you give your own identity up. And that is when your true nature will be revealed. And that itself, that getting to that true nature is self realization.
Any other questions in the
The hardest animal to tame, I'm calling it an animal for lack of another better word, or the most notorious beast that once you tame, you start experiencing bliss, is the mind. So, if you have tamed it, you will not experience restlessness. And restlessness is what you can find anywhere and everywhere today. And becoming restless is probably the easiest thing that anybody can do. Being at peace is the hardest. And sages say that if we can control our mind, that is, we are not being restless. Then what we experience is the kind of bliss, that kind of bliss would seem like an ocean. This is what Vasishta says in Yoga Vasishta. In comparison with all the pleasures on earth, which would seem like a drop.
which would seem like a
Drop.
drop.
All the pleasures on earth would seem like a drop in comparison to the ocean of bliss that a person who has his mind and his control experiences. We'll catch up tomorrow. Thank you, guys.